Sarah Morgan never expected such humiliation when she walked into Westfield Technologies for a marketing position. Water deliberately spilled on her shirt, sneers at her appearance, and finally dismissal. But when Thomas Tom Westfield unexpectedly arrived at the office, everyone realized their catastrophic mistake. The woman they had just humiliated was married to the company's billionaire owner. Sarah Westfield checked her reflection in the mirrored walls of the Westfield Technologies elevator. At 37, she still had the same warm hazel eyes that had captivated her husband years ago, though today they reflected nervous anticipation. She smoothed down her light blue blouse, purchased specifically for this interview. Nothing fancy, but professional and appropriate. Top floor, executive offices, announced the pleasant automated voice as the doors slid open. The Westfield Technologies headquarters occupied the most prestigious high-rise in downtown Boston, its glass windows offering panoramic views of the harbor. Sarah entered the reception area, her modest heels clicking against the marble floor. "I'm here for the 10 o'clock a.m. interview for the marketing director position," she told the receptionist, a young woman with perfectly styled auburn hair. The receptionist glanced up, her gaze briefly assessing Sarah's simple attire before returning to her computer screen. "Name?" "Sarah Morgan," she replied confidently, using her maiden name. For 15 years, Sarah had built her own career in marketing, steadily climbing the ladder at smaller firms. When the prestigious position at Westfield Technologies opened up, she decided to apply without telling Tom. Not that he would disapprove, quite the opposite. He had always encouraged her professional ambitions. But Sarah wanted to earn this position on her own merits, not because she was Mrs. Westfield. The receptionist tapped at her keyboard. "Please take a seat. Someone will be with you shortly." Sarah settled into one of the sleek chairs, placing her portfolio on her lap. Around her, employees hurried through the office, their expensive suits and confident strides broadcasting success and ambition. She took a deep breath, pushing aside the butterflies in her stomach. Though she'd never worked in a company this size, her qualifications were impeccable. She had the experience, the education, and the innovative ideas to excel in this role. "Miss Morgan," called Olivia, the receptionist, "they're ready for you now." As Sarah rose to follow Olivia down the hallway, she reminded herself why she was here. Tom had built this company from the ground up, transforming it from a small tech startup into a Fortune 500 giant. She had watched him pour his heart and soul into Westfield Technologies, and she understood its values and vision better than anyone. Now she wanted to contribute her own talents to its continued success. The conference room door opened, revealing 4 executives seated around a polished table. Sarah squared her shoulders and stepped inside, unaware that she was walking into the most humiliating experience of her professional life. The conference room exuded power and privilege. Floor-to-ceiling windows showcased Boston's skyline, while awards and accolades lined the walls, silent testimonies to Westfield Technologies' success. 4 pairs of eyes turned to assess Sarah as she entered. "Miss Morgan, please have a seat," said Daniel Parker, the HR director, gesturing to the empty chair across from him. His tone was professionally neutral, but Sarah didn't miss how his eyes flickered over her simple attire. "Thank you for the opportunity," Sarah replied, settling her portfolio on the table as she sat down. To Daniel's left sat Catherine Hayes, Chief Operating Officer, her dark hair pulled into a severe bun. Next to her was another executive Sarah didn't recognize, and then came Richard, the marketing VP, the position's direct supervisor. His expensive suit and perfectly coiffed hair screamed corporate success, but something in his smirk made Sarah instantly uneasy. "So," Richard began, leaning back in his leather chair without bothering to look at her resume, "Morgan, is it? Tell us why you think you're qualified to work at Westfield Technologies." The emphasis he placed on qualified wasn't subtle. Sarah took a steadying breath. I have 15 years of experience in marketing with a proven track record of successful campaigns that increased client revenue by an average of 37%. My approach combines data-driven strategies with creative innovation. Where did you get that blouse? Richard interrupted, his mouth curving into a mocking smile. The discount rack. Catherine Hayes stifled what might have been a laugh, quickly disguising it as a cough. Heat rose to Sarah's cheeks, but she maintained her composure. As I was saying, my background includes. We've reviewed your resume, Daniel cut in, his tone suggesting he hadn't been impressed. You've worked for some smaller companies. Boutique firms, Sarah corrected politely, which allowed me to gain hands-on experience across multiple industries. In fact, the campaign I developed last year for Riverdale Electronics increased their market share by 15% in a highly competitive environment. Riverdale Electronics, Richard scoffed. Hardly a player in the tech industry. Sarah kept her expression neutral despite the dismissive tone. Actually, under my marketing guidance, they've become the fastest-growing electronics company in the Northeast. I believe those same strategies could be applied to Westfield Technologies' new product line, particularly the smart home technology division. Richard exchanged glances with Catherine, something unspoken passing between them. You've researched our company, Catherine noted, sounding mildly surprised. Extensively, Sarah confirmed. I believe Westfield Technologies is positioned to dominate the smart home market. But your current marketing approach isn't reaching the demographic most likely to adopt this technology early. For a moment, genuine interest flickered across Catherine's face, but Richard cleared his throat loudly. Tell me, Miss Morgan, he said, picking up a glass of water, do you really think someone from your background fits the Westfield Technologies image? He gestured around the opulent conference room. We have a certain standard here. Sarah straightened her spine. My qualifications speak for themselves. I've consistently delivered results. Results? Richard laughed, cutting her off again. Let me tell you about results. Last quarter, I secured a partnership with Global Tech that added $50 million to our bottom line. What exactly in your little career comes close to that? Sarah opened her portfolio. If you look at page 3 of my presentation, you'll see that proportionally, my campaigns have. Oh, she's brought homework, Richard sneered, looking to his colleagues for approval. They chuckled on cue, though Daniel appeared slightly uncomfortable. Catherine leaned forward. Miss Morgan, while we appreciate your enthusiasm, Westfield Technologies requires a certain polish. Our executives represent the company to major clients and stakeholders. I understand that, Sarah replied steadily, but surely the results I can deliver matter more than what? Richard challenged, his eyes narrowing. Than looking the part, than understanding our culture, than fitting in with the team Tom Westfield has carefully built over the years. The casual mention of her husband by his first name sent a jolt through Sarah. They spoke of Tom as if they knew him personally, yet she, his wife of 12 years, was being treated like an unwelcome outsider. Before she could respond, Richard reached for his water glass again. What happened next occurred so quickly that Sarah barely had time to react. As he gestured emphatically, the glass tilted, sending water cascading directly onto Sarah's blue blouse. The cold liquid soaked through the fabric immediately, making the material cling to her skin. Sarah gasped, jumping up in shock. Oh my, Richard said, not bothering to hide his smirk. How clumsy of me. Sarah stood frozen, water dripping from her now transparent blouse. The professional facade she'd maintained throughout the interview threatened to crack, as she felt the eyes of everyone in the room on her. I'm so sorry, Richard said, his voice dripping with insincerity. Let me get you something to dry off with. He made no move to actually help, instead taking a slow sip from what remained in his glass. Daniel Parker finally showed a flicker of decency, pulling out a handful of tissues from a box on the table and offering them to Sarah. Here, he said quietly, not quite meeting her eyes. "Thank you," Sarah murmured, dabbing at her blouse. The thin tissues did little against the soaked fabric, and she knew her appearance was beyond salvaging. Catherine Hayes made a poor attempt to hide her amusement. "Perhaps this is a sign," she said with false sympathy. "Westfield Technologies might not be the environment you're accustomed to." Sarah took a deep breath, struggling to maintain her composure. "Accidents happen," she said, voice steady despite the humiliation burning through her. "Shall we continue the interview?" Richard let out a short, cruel laugh. "I think we've seen enough, Miss Morgan." He exchanged glances with Catherine. "Westfield Technologies has a certain image to maintain. We don't hire—" He paused, the mask of politeness completely gone now. "Well, let's just say we have standards. We don't hire low-class people," he continued. "Our executives represent this company to billion-dollar clients. We need people who understand our world, who belong in it." Sarah felt as if she'd been slapped. In all the professional career, she'd never been spoken to with such blatant disrespect. Catherine nodded in agreement. "Someone with your background would be more comfortable in a smaller company, somewhere less prestigious." "My background," Sarah echoed, her voice tight. She knew exactly what they were implying, that her simple appearance, her lack of designer clothes and status symbols somehow made her less qualified, less worthy. "Don't take it personally," Richard said, though his smirk indicated he very much intended it to be personal. "Not everyone is cut out for the big leagues." Daniel shifted uncomfortably in his seat. "Perhaps we should." "No need to drag this out," Richard interrupted. "Miss Morgan, thank you for your time, but we'll be pursuing other candidates." Sarah stared at them, their expressions ranging from Richard's open contempt to Daniel's uncomfortable silence. She thought of Tom, of the company he had built with integrity and vision. These people claimed to represent his values, yet their behavior reflected none of the principles she knew her husband held dear. For a moment, she considered revealing her identity, watching their smug expressions dissolve into horror as they realized who they'd just humiliated. But that wasn't why she was here. She had wanted to earn this position through her own merit, not her marital status. "I see," she said finally, gathering her dampened portfolio with as much dignity as she could muster. She rose to her feet. "Thank you for your consideration." She turned to leave, her wet blouse clinging uncomfortably to her skin, when Richard called after her. "Miss Morgan, the elevator is at the end of the hall. Please see yourself out." The final words were punctuated by snickers from Catherine. Sarah walked out with her head held high, but inside, a storm of emotions raged. How could these people work for Tom's company and behave this way? The Tom Westfield she knew would never tolerate such arrogance and cruelty. Little did they know, they were about to find out exactly what Tom Westfield thought of their behavior. Sarah walked briskly down the hall, her heels echoing against the marble floor. The cold, wet fabric of her blouse clung to her skin, a physical reminder of the humiliation she'd just endured. Employees glanced at her as she passed, their eyes lingering on her dampened appearance with barely concealed curiosity. She just needed to make it to the elevator. Once the door was closed, she could let the tears of frustration and anger fall. But not here, not where they could see her. As she rounded the corner toward the elevator bank, Sarah nearly collided with someone. Strong hands steadied her shoulders, and a familiar voice filled her ears. "Whoa there, are you?" The voice stopped abruptly. "Sarah?" Sarah looked up into the concerned face of her husband. Tom Westfield, founder and CEO of Westfield Technologies, stood before her in his tailored charcoal suit, his expression changing from surprise to confusion as he took in her appearance. "What happened?" he asked, his voice dropping as he noticed her wet clothes and distressed expression. "What are you doing here?" Before Sarah could answer, the sound of laughter floated down the hallway. Richard and Catherine emerged from the conference room, still chuckling over their treatment of the low-class job applicant. They stopped dead when they spotted Tom. Mr. Westfield, Richard exclaimed, his voice rising an octave in surprise. We weren't expecting you until this afternoon. Tom barely glanced at them, his attention focused entirely on his wife, Sarah. She took a deep breath, aware of the employees gathering in the hallway, drawn by the unexpected appearance of the CEO. I had an interview, she said simply, for the marketing director position. Understanding dawned in Tom's eyes, followed quickly by concern as he looked again at her wet blouse. And this, he gestured to her dampened clothing. An accident, Sarah said, though her tone conveyed it had been anything but. Tom's jaw tightened. He turned slowly toward Richard and Catherine, who stood frozen, their earlier amusement replaced by growing horror as realization set in. Mr. Westfield, Catherine began, her voice unnaturally high. We didn't realize. That's abundantly clear. Tom cut her off, his voice quiet but laced with steel. He turned back to Sarah, his expression softening. Are you all right? She nodded, standing a little straighter. My office, Tom said, placing a gentle hand on the small of her back. Please. As they walked past the stunned executives, Tom stopped briefly. Richard, Catherine, Daniel, my office, 10 minutes. The three executives exchanged panicked glances as Tom and Sarah continued down the hall. Whispers erupted among the employees who had witnessed the exchange, the news spreading through the office like wildfire. The woman they just interviewed and rejected was Mrs. Westfield. Inside Tom's spacious corner office, Sarah finally allowed her shoulders to sag. Tom closed the door, then immediately pulled her into a gentle embrace. I'm so sorry, he murmured against her hair. If I'd known you were applying. That's exactly why I didn't tell you, Sarah said, pulling back to look at him. I wanted this position on my own merits, not because I'm your wife. Tom's eyes filled with pride, even as anger flickered across his face. What exactly happened in there? Sarah hesitated, then told him everything. The dismissive attitude, the pointed comments about her appearance, and finally the accidental water spill and the cruel dismissal. With each detail, Tom's expression darkened. By the time she finished, his jaw was clenched so tightly that a muscle twitched in his cheek. This isn't the company I built, he said finally, his voice a low growl. This isn't who we are. A knock at the door interrupted them. Tom checked his watch. 10 minutes exactly. At least they can follow one instruction. He looked at Sarah. You should be part of this. Sarah straightened her spine despite her still damp blouse. Yes, she agreed. I should. Tom opened his office door to reveal Richard, Catherine, and Daniel standing in a tight cluster, their earlier confidence replaced by barely concealed panic. Their eyes widened further when they saw Sarah standing beside Tom's desk, her composure fully restored despite her damp clothing. Come in, Tom said, his tone deceptively calm. Close the door. The three executives filed in, arranging themselves in front of Tom's desk like schoolchildren summoned to the principal's office. Richard, who had been so bold in the conference room, now seemed unable to meet anyone's gaze. 15 years, Tom began, leaning against his desk. That's how long I've been building this company. 15 years of emphasizing that Westfield Technology's success is built on integrity, innovation, and treating people with respect. He looked at each executive in turn, his disappointment palpable. So imagine my surprise when I discovered that my executives are behaving like elitist bullies, judging candidates on their appearance rather than their qualifications. Catherine was the first to attempt damage control. Mr. Westfield, there's been a misunderstanding. We had no idea Miss Morgan was your wife, and that makes it acceptable. Tom finished for her. If she were a stranger, it would be fine to humiliate her, to deliberately spill water on her clothes. His voice remained quiet, but each word landed like a lash. Richard flinched. Sir, I can explain. Please do, Tom interrupted, folding his arms. Explain to me why the marketing VP of Westfield Technologies believes we don't hire low-class people. I'm fascinated to hear your definition of class. The blood drained from Richard's face as his own words were thrown back at him. He opened his mouth, then closed it again, no explanation forthcoming. Sarah stepped forward. I'd like to hear it too, she said, her voice steady, especially since my low-class marketing strategies have consistently outperformed industry standards. Daniel Parker, who had remained silent until now, finally spoke. Mrs. Westfield, I want to apologize. I should have intervened. Yes, you should have, Tom agreed. As HR director, it's literally your job to ensure that interviews are conducted professionally and candidates are evaluated on their qualifications. He shook his head in disappointment. Instead, you sat there while a qualified applicant was mocked and humiliated. Daniel's shoulders slumped in shame. Catherine attempted another approach. We were simply concerned about maintaining Westfield Technologies' professional standards. Were you? Sarah interjected, her voice cool. Or were you protecting your territory? Because when I mentioned that your current marketing strategy isn't effectively targeting early adopters for the smart home division, you seemed threatened rather than interested. Catherine's mouth snapped shut, her face reddening. Tom looked at his wife with admiration before turning back to the executives. Do you know why I started this company? Not to create a playground for inflated egos, but to build technology that improves people's lives. He moved to stand beside Sarah. And do you know who was there from the beginning? Who believed in my vision when we were working out of a garage apartment? Who has been my sounding board, my critic, and my strongest supporter for 15 years? The question hung in the air, the answer painfully obvious. Sarah doesn't need a job at Westfield Technologies. She has a successful career of her own. But when she told me she wanted to apply for the marketing director position, do you know what I thought? Tom smiled at his wife. I thought we'd be lucky to have her. Catherine cleared her throat awkwardly. Mr. Westfield, in light of this misunderstanding, we'd like to reconsider Mrs. Westfield's application. Sarah shook her head. That won't be necessary. Richard, desperate to salvage the situation, jumped in. Mrs. Westfield, please, it was a terrible mistake. If you give us another chance to evaluate your qualifications. My qualifications, Sarah said firmly, were available to you during the interview. You chose not to see them because you were too busy judging my clothes and making assumptions about my background. That tells me everything I need to know about your judgment and your character. Tom's phone buzzed with an incoming message. He glanced at it, then back at the three executives. HR is preparing your severance packages. What? Richard gasped, panic overtaking his face. You're firing us over one mistake. No, Tom replied. I'm firing you for creating a toxic culture that's antithetical to everything Westfield Technologies stands for. This one mistake is merely the culmination of attitudes and behaviors that have no place in my company. Catherine stared in disbelief. But my record, my performance is impressive. It is, Tom acknowledged, but Westfield Technologies isn't just about performance metrics. It's about who we are as people. He moved toward the door, opening it. Security will escort you to clean out your desks. Your building access will be revoked by end of day. As the gravity of the situation settled over them, the three executives seemed to physically shrink. One by one, they shuffled toward the door, their careers at Westfield Technologies effectively over. Before they left, Sarah called out, Daniel. The HR director turned, his expression resigned. When I said accidents happen, I meant it, Sarah said. But cruelty isn't an accident. It's a choice. Daniel nodded once, acknowledging the truth in her words, then followed his colleagues out. As the door closed behind them, Tom turned to his wife, his expression a mixture of pride and regret. I'm sorry you had to experience that. Sarah moved into his embrace. I'm not, she said softly. Sometimes people need to be reminded that how they treat others matters, especially those they think have no power. Tom held her close. You've always been the heart of this company, even if no one knew it. Would you consider taking the marketing director position? We could really use someone with your vision. Sarah smiled up at him, her earlier humiliation fading in the warmth of her husband's respect. Let me think about it. But if I do, I want to be hired for my skills, not because I'm Mrs. Westfield. Your skills are precisely why we need you, Tom assured her. Though I have to admit, being Mrs. Westfield is definitely a bonus. Sarah laughed, feeling lighter than she had all day. In that case, I might just have some ideas about how to revolutionize your marketing department. I never doubted it for a second, Tom replied, pressing a gentle kiss to her forehead. Together, they would build a company that valued integrity as much as innovation. A company where people were judged by their character and contributions, not by the price tag on their clothes.